Hello, today is June 10th, 2021. My name is Leslie Torres. I am interviewing Emma Guevara for the University Library Special Collections and Archives at the University of Texas Rio Grande Valley, hereafter abbreviated as UTRGV. This project is in partnership with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. Please know, Ms. Guevara, that this interview,
Guevara.
I'm sorry. Please know, Ms. Guevara, that this interview will be placed in the University Library Special Collections and Archives at UTRGV and shared with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin. If there is anything you do not wish to answer or talk about, I will honor your wishes. Also, if there is something you want to talk about, please bring it up and we'll talk about it. The University Library Special Collections and Archives will archive your interview along with any other photographs or other documentation you are willing to share. UTRGV University Library will retain copyright or non-exclusive right to the interview and any other materials you donate to Special Collections and Archives at UTRGV. So because we are not conducting this interview in person, I need to record you consenting to make sure you agree with our interview procedures before we continue. So I'll ask you a series of 6 questions. Please say yes, I agree, or no, I do not agree after each question. Number 1. Do you give University Library Special Collections and Archives at UTRGV consent to archive your interview and your materials at the UTRGV University Library?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, and do you grant UTRGV University Library Special Collections and Archives right, title, and interest and copyright over the interview and any materials you provide?
Yes, I agree.
And do you agree to allow UTRGV University Library Special Collections and Archives to post this interview on the internet where it may be viewed by people around the world?
Yes, I agree.
Do you grant the University Library Special Collections and Archives consent to share your Zoom interview with the Voces Oral History Center at the University of Texas at Austin for inclusion in the Voices of a Pandemic Oral History mini project, which will include posting the interview on the internet?
Yes, I agree.
Okay. As you recall, we previously filled out a pre-interview form. We use information from the pre-interview form to help in research. The entire form is kept in a secure Voces server at the University of Texas at Austin. Before Voces sends it to UTRGV University Library Special Collections and Archives, we would have stripped out any contact information for yourself or for family members, so that will not be part of your public file. Your public file will only be accessible at UTRGV University Library. The final 2 questions ask for your consent on what I just described. So, do you wish for us to share the rest of your interview in your public file available to researchers at UTRGV University Library Special Collections and Archives?
Yes, I agree.
On occasion, UTRGV Special Collections and Archives and Voces receive requests from journalists who wish to contact our interview subjects. We only deal with legitimate news outlets. Do you give consent for us to share your phone numbers or your email with journalists?
Yes, I agree.
Okay, thank you for your consent. Your experiences and stories mean a lot to us at UTRGV Special Collections and Archives. I look forward to what you will say and any of your questions I will now ask. So, Emma, thank you for your time. Like I said earlier, your stories and experiences are valuable to us at UTRGV Special Collections and Archives and the Voces Project. Particularly for us at UTRGV Special Collections, we are committed to preserving the stories of Mexican Americans and Latinos from South Texas and the Rio Grande Valley and those who work closely with these populations during the COVID-19 pandemic. So because you have been active in your community for years and have recently led successful mutual aid drives for houseless communities in Brownsville, and because you are a daughter, sister, and friend who is knowledgeable of the ways COVID-19 has affected others in her inner circle, I know you have many meaningful stories and experiences to share on how COVID-19 has impacted these roles you carry out in your life. So, before I ask you to share stories about your life in this pandemic, tell us, who is Emma Guevara?
Close. Guevara. It's okay,
Yeah.
don't worry about it. And so I'm just supposed to go through like a little like bio of myself, or
Sure, just tell us whatever you would like to tell us about yourself.
Okay, cool. So my name is Emma Guevara. I'm 23. I live in Brownsville, Texas. I'm from Brownsville. I've lived here pretty much my whole life. And yeah, I'm a pretty active community member. But that's about it.
Okay, so The first question I want to ask you is, when did you first hear about COVID-19 and how did you learn about it? Through radio, TV, social media, or any other sources?
Sure. So I first heard about COVID-19, I believe I remember it was being discussed a little bit in like January of 2020, very like vaguely. And I heard most of it through social media. But I don't think I really actually understood what it was and what it meant until around February, when it started to really make the rounds around New York City and Seattle. And yeah, I read most of what I know about it. I learned through social media, like reading the news, checking CDC websites, and just talking to friends I have that work in like the medical field or have family members that do. And yeah.
Okay, so what was your first reaction to the information about COVID-19?
I think my very first reaction was kind of like confusion and like, oh man, I hope that doesn't get too bad. I didn't really know what it was, didn't really know what it was about. I just understood that a lot of people were getting very sick from it. Once it really took, like, it really got here to the US, I know like my first reaction when I heard about all of the deaths in Seattle and New York, I was like, oh my gosh, like this is a lot more serious than we think it is. And I think that's continued to prove true, just the more the pandemic has panned out, if you will.
Okay, and is that when you would say you realized the pandemic was a serious life-altering event, or was there another time in which you realized that?
I don't think I fully realized it until like good portions of the country started to shut down. So for me, it was a week before I went on spring break. And I was a kindergarten teacher at the time, and I had a kid show up to school with a mask and hand sanitizer before we ever went on lockdown, before spring break even happened. This is when everything was still like normal, no masks. And her mom was just very concerned and wanted her to wear it. And I said that was fine. But I remember thinking like, this is gonna make things a lot different very quickly.
Okay. And over the last few months, what news media, social media, or other sources do you rely on to keep you informed about coronavirus? Or over the last year, I would say.
Sure. I think a big one has been making sure that I'm following like what the CDC is reporting. I really like using Twitter, and if you go to the search bar on Twitter, they have a whole section just for COVID. And so it'll give you like the quickest updates from different news sources, things like that. And so I've tried to pay pretty close attention to that, and also to like the county and the city pages on social media, because that's where they were updating like mask mandates, numbers of how many people had gotten sick, what the rules were at the time. So that's kind of where I stuck to. And I noticed that that's what was being updated the quickest.
Okay, and can you share with me what you understand about COVID-19 as an infectious disease and any of its variants? And likewise, can you share with me what you don't understand about this new coronavirus?
Sure. So from what I understand is it's a flu-like virus that causes respiratory issues, and can also cause like long-term respiratory issues, even if you do recover. A big issue with all of the variants in general is that it tends to affect older people or people with pre-existing conditions a lot more harshly than it does healthy adults or kids even don't get it as badly. But the problem is that it can cause really bad pneumonia, and that's how a lot of people have died. For the variants, I'm not like a scientist or a doctor. I can't tell you exactly what's different about them. But from what I understand is the antibodies are a little bit different. I know there was a while where they were saying we should wear 2 masks at the same time to help combat the variants. Because while they do behave a lot like, the original coronavirus COVID-19, the way the antibodies work is a little bit different. So I guess, yeah, that's what I would say. I don't super understand about it. Like I couldn't tell you the science or exactly how a virus works. I'm not a biologist or anything like that, but I think I get the basics of it. It's important to stay clean. It's important to social distance because when we speak or cough or sneeze or breathe or just stand near somebody, aerosols leave our nose and our mouth, which can get onto other people, and that's what made it so contagious. So that's been scary.
And can you tell me what you know about the various vaccines available to the public, and how do you feel about these vaccines?
Sure. So there are quite a few different vaccines that are available to the public. I know here we had 3 for a while. I know Johnson & Johnson was kind of put on the back burner for a hot minute. I'm not sure if it's back now. I haven't looked just because I've been vaccinated. And so the main 2 that people are getting here in the US is Pfizer and Moderna, which are mRNA vaccines, which have caused quite a lot of controversy just because they were developed fairly quickly in some people's opinion, even though the idea of mRNA vaccines has been in effect and people have been working on these kinds of vaccines for years now. Personally, I'm a big fan of vaccines. I got, my COVID vaccine as soon as I could. I highly recommend as many people as possible to get the vaccine. I can totally understand why some people would be wary of it, specifically people of color, Black people, just because of the way that the US has just medically abused anybody who isn't a cis white man in this country. But I can attest to the fact that it does not make you magnetic or mess with your 5G or, it didn't make me sick or anything. So yeah, I'm a big fan. I would hope everybody gets it as soon as they can. And hopefully more people come around to the idea of getting it so that we can really create herd immunity and kind of be ahead of this.
Okay, and on that note, do you have a vaccination story that you would like to share with me now or perhaps later in this interview?
Sure. I like to share my vaccination story because it's boring. And I feel like everybody that has gotten a vaccine really likes to either post that they got it or post about what terrible symptoms they've had. And sometimes I feel like that freaks people out and deters them from wanting to get vaccinated. So I got vaccinated with Cameron County Public Health. It took probably 30 or 45 minutes total for both doses because it was so quick. I think I was in and out both times in like 15 minutes. And I had minor arm pain with the first vaccine. And the second vaccine, I also had some arm pain and some body aches, but I took Tylenol and was fine. And I think I felt tired the next morning, but that was about it. And it was super easy, super simple, and gave me quite a lot of peace of mind now.
Okay. And do your family members hold the same beliefs as you about COVID-19, or are there some who take it more seriously or more lightly?
I would say the majority of my family holds similar beliefs to me about COVID-19. I think for a lot of my older family members and like my parents included, or specifically like my mom, I think they don't take it as seriously as I do, just because I do take it pretty seriously and really did for quite a while. But ultimately, I've had no issues with people needing to wear masks or social distancing, things like that. So that's been nice. I do have a few family members though, that are like more extended that like don't believe that it's real or in masks or vaccines. And so that's been a little bit stressful because they do like to go visit my elderly grandmother. But luckily, both her and my grandfather are now fully vaccinated. And so I feel a lot safer about that now.
Okay. And so for these next set of questions, I'd like to talk about how you've seen COVID-19 affect family members, friends, and yourself. So first, can you share with me in general, how many members are in your family and who are they to you?
Sure. So in my like immediate family,
Yes.
we're technically 6, but more like 5. I have a much older brother who lives out of state, but here in Brownsville, it's my mom and dad and my younger sister and my younger brother. I don't live with them anymore though, but I do see them multiple times a week for quite a while. So we're pretty close.
Okay. And what was your immediate family's reaction to COVID?
I think that the most that everybody was worried about was other people. Like we weren't really worried about ourselves getting sick, just because my parents are also they're like in their 40s, so they're not super old. They weren't too worried about getting like really, really sick. And then my siblings are 7 and 11. Yes, she's 11. 7 and 11. So they're a little bit older. We weren't super worried about ourselves, but we were really worried about my dad's parents, who are my older elderly grandparents, because my grandmother is like 89, I think. Yeah, so she's pretty old, and she does have pre-existing conditions, including an autoimmune disease. And my grandfather is also, he's over 65 for sure. I don't know exactly how old he is, but he's 100% disabled as well. So like, even my grandmother getting sick can really cause a lot of issues, just with, you know, who needs to help him, who needs to help her. And my parents live, I think, like 2 or 3 blocks away from them, so they're the number one call if anything goes wrong. So that was, I think, everybody's main concern.
Okay. And I know you said you don't live with them right now, but were you living with your family when the stay-at-home order of last March and April of 2020 was enacted?
No, I have my own apartment.
Oh, okay. So when the stay-at-home order was enacted, and you said you're not living with them, right? Or you weren't living with them, you still aren't. Did you quarantine? And if so, what was that like?
I did. It was boring and kind of lonely, if I'm being honest. So I live in an apartment with my boyfriend and our cats, and he was still working because he was an essential worker at the time. So it was just me here. I was a teacher though, so I was teaching kinder at the time, and so I was teaching. That was right when we started like virtual learning. So that's mostly what I did all day, was try to figure out how to teach kindergarten on a computer.
What kinds of changes did you have to make? Besides, I know you went virtual, right? But like, how did you try to keep the kids engaged and continue learning?
So for that end of that, you know, second semester of, I guess, the 2019-2020 school year, since I taught kinder, my class was kind of on the back burner. They were more concerned about older kids, especially the kids that were supposed to standardize tests that year, and like high school, because the school that I worked at was K through 12. So I was able to do pretty much all of the rest of that semester asynchronous, just because for most parents that's what worked the best. Because not all of my kids had devices at home, not all of my kids had internet. And so it was pretty difficult. And I did have quite a few kids whose parents were like frontline medical workers as well. So it was weird going from hanging out with them from morning until the afternoon nonstop, you know, 25 5-year-olds, to then just being like, okay guys, here's your assignment, and maybe seeing them for like 30 minutes here or there on Zoom. but they were so little, we couldn't really do anything that was, you know, too long or too extensive. So it was a weird adjustment in that way. Like, I was like, it's quiet. So weird.
And this was for Brownsville ISD?
No, this was for a charter school, Jubilee Brownsville.
Okay. And so for the students who didn't have access to devices, what did you have to do in order to like pass them or keep them going, I guess?
Students that didn't have access to devices, there was a lot of work happening to try to get them devices. So for the most part with those kids, usually their parents had a phone. And so I would text their parents the assignments. And just be like, this is what we did today. If you could just text me a picture of you know, a finished assignment at the end of the week, that would be great. And so I did kind of just have to slow it down with those people and those kids. And eventually, I think most of them got a device by the end. I think I only had one kid who didn't, and we kind of did it that way, if that makes sense, where I just kind of texted her mom our assignments for the week, and then she would text me back completed assignments. But the district itself, like the Jubilee Academy District, which spans from the Valley to San Antonio, they told us, I think especially for elementary that year, like we were just going to pass everybody. And kindergarten's not a requirement anyways. You're only required to start school in first grade. So it doesn't super matter if you pass or fail kindergarten. So as long as I got, I think it was like 5 completed assignments, I was allowed to pass them.
Okay. And for the ones who over the semester tried to get devices, did the charter school ISD help with that, or was it more kind of they had to handle it on their own and figure it out? The students.
Yeah, so the school had class sets. Like in my classroom, I had a class set of iPads, and there were class sets of, I think, Chromebooks as well that the district had. The problem was there weren't enough for every single kid, so they had to do a lot of doubling up. Like if you have siblings that go to the school, you only get one for the family. And I think that's like what took the longest. The problem though is that with this district is they were offering devices but not hotspots. So me personally, what I did is I know at the time, I think it was Spectrum was offering free hotspots if you called. And so I just made sure to tell all the parents about that. I'm like, if you don't have Wi-Fi, you have to call this number. You're gonna wait in line for a really long time, but I promise like they'll send you a free hotspot. So a few of my kids got internet that way, which was great.
Okay.
Yeah.
And did you continue teaching for the kindergarten class for the school district after that semester?
After that semester, I worked the first like month and a half of the fall semester, but I stopped working with them pretty soon after that, just because the way that the next semester was handled was a real mess. And I'm sure any teacher will tell you that this last full year of like virtual learning is ridiculous.
Okay, well, thank you for sharing that. Going back to the inner circle questions, because I got off topic, but did you continue to quarantine after the stay-at-home order was lifted, and why or why not?
I did, because cases got worse after the stay-at-home order was lifted, and I wasn't trying to get sick. So yeah.
Okay, and in our pre-interview, you mentioned, oh wait, sorry, I got ahead of myself. So did you still visit your friends and family during the stay-at-home order?
During the stay-at-home order, no. Yeah, the stay-at-home order, we stayed, I think it was 2 weeks here in Brownsville. And I didn't see anybody at all, not even my immediate family. Once it was lifted, that was the only place I would go. So I would go visit my mom.
Okay, and in our pre-interview, you mentioned that one of your uncles survived COVID-19. How did you react to his diagnosis and health struggle?
I wasn't surprised, uh, just because of like the line of work that he's in. He's in close contact and close quarters and traveling a lot with a large group of people. Um, I feel like I'm more surprised that he's totally okay. Just because he's not the healthiest person. He's definitely a really heavy smoker, like has a lot of lung problems. And so we were convinced like, oh, this is it. He's gonna get sick and die in like 3 days. And he was fine. He was like, it's like a cold. So that was, I think, I'm just more surprised than anything.
Okay. And when you had to go in public and your boyfriend as well, since he's your roommate, did you change the way you socialized, and why or why not?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, even now, I try not to be out and about at like high volume times, the kind of 9 to 5 schedule. I try to be at home by 5, or not out at that point, just because it does get a lot more crowded. I try not to go too many places during the weekends because they're a lot more crowded. um I know definitely earlier in the pandemic, I was a lot more wary about being around people. Now that I'm vaccinated, I'm a little bit less nervous about people standing too close to me, or people that aren't wearing their mask correctly. That was really stressful during the main parts of the pandemic and pre-vaccination and stuff like that. Now I think I've definitely lightened up a lot, but like I'm still wearing my mask everywhere. I don't have plans to stop anytime soon, just because we're running on the honor system right now. And I know there's some liars out there. But yeah, I definitely socialize quite a lot less.
Okay.
And
And
yeah.
how did the pandemic impact family traditions, customs, and holiday celebrations? For example, did you celebrate birthdays and Christmas differently? Did you have a traditional Thanksgiving in November of 2020, or things like that? How did you celebrate those events?
Yeah. I think all of those events have just been scaled down, and that's been interesting. Um, so birthdays in general, I don't think have really changed, just because what we don't we're not really big like birthday party people for grown-ups. We mostly like do cake, we eat dinner together. That's about it. But major holidays have definitely been scaled down. Both sets of my grandparents live here in Brownsville, so we usually do kind of like a double Christmas, double Thanksgiving. Um, but this year it was kept very small. And like our Thanksgiving was just like myself, my boyfriend, my parents, my siblings, and I think that might have actually been it. It was very small. Usually, there's a lot more extended family members that come around. So it was definitely different. I didn't mind though.
Okay. And if you attended any weddings, graduations, or funerals over the last year, can you please share with me how the pandemic made these events different from pre-pandemic times, if you attended any at all?
I didn't. So I don't know. I didn't go to any.
Okay. And can you explain what the transition to work at home was like for you? And do you still work from home?
Sure. I think it was definitely easier for me than a lot of people, just because before I taught, I worked from home. So it was a much easier transition, just because I've done it before. And I still work from home, and I have no plans to stop working from home anytime soon. I really like working from home, and I like the freedom that it gives, just time wise. So I'm a fan. I know not everybody is, but
And how did you cope with the abrupt changes in social or outside life that came with the stay-at-home order and your quarantine afterwards? Like, did you develop any new hobbies or things like that?
yeah. Um, I got really into art at, for a while, and I'm still pretty into it, which I wasn't really an artist before COVID, or like an active artist. I always kind of doodled, but now I actually try. And I also learned how to crochet, which has been pretty fun. So I definitely fell into some hobbies. I don't know. Before the pandemic, I was working such a high impact or like high or time consuming job. So I wasn't really super social to begin with. So that wasn't much of a big change. But it was weird, like when people started planning like Zoom parties. Like one of my best friends had her birthday party on Zoom. And that was interesting. But it was fun. I didn't mind because it was great. I got to be in the comfort of my own home. But yeah, Zoom hangouts, Zoom parties, or like Zoom happy hours, that was weird and interesting.
Okay, and now I would like to ask you about one of your current jobs as a contact tracer. So, can you first tell me when you were first hired as a contact tracer and who employs you?
Yeah, I was hired in January, I think, the end of January. And I was employed by UT Health.
Okay, in January 2021, right?
Yes, of this year.
Okay, and how does UT Health obtain information about COVID-infected individuals?
They work with the Texas Department of State Health Services, which does its own contact tracing in tandem with the US government, just for, in general for other diseases as well. And so UT Health received a grant to hire people to help with this project. And so, yeah.
Okay, and can you describe your role and tasks as a contact tracer?
So contact tracing just basically means that you are contacting a PUI, which is a person under investigation. So that's somebody who might have tested positive for COVID in a PCR test or COVID antibodies, meaning they had it in the past. And basically what my whole job was calling these people, confirming their identities, and then asking them demographical information, demographical health information about their like health history, learning about their symptoms, if they've been vaccinated, how long they had symptoms for, and then tracing where they've been, who they've seen, where they work, if they've traveled, who lives in their house, who's been exposed, and gathering information on anyone or any place that's been exposed, documenting it accordingly, and then turning, basically, I would turn that case back in, and then somebody on the higher up would call, maybe like if they went to, I had somebody go on a plane. So I had to get like the airline, the flight number, the seat that he sat in. And so then it was then escalated to an epidemiologist who then contacted the airline and told them like, everybody who worked on this flight, anybody who's been on this flight needs to be contacted and needs to be tested. And so from there, I'm sure there were other positives, but kind of tracing who started it, I guess, is kind of what it is.
Okay, and has being a contact tracer informed your personal decisions, such as choosing to practice mask wearing, social distancing, or perhaps even feeling safe or unsafe to go out?
Definitely. When I first started contact tracing, cases were still pretty bad at the time. And so it was a little bit freaky to like see how many cases I was getting in like one shift. And then hearing how people got it definitely influenced some decisions. I had quite a few PUIs who were pretty sure they got COVID from church, which I don't go to church anyways, but I was like, cool, I'm definitely steering clear of large groups. It definitely made me want to wear my mask more just because of how many people were sick. And more recently, a lot of like the last few cases that I was getting were children and teachers that were like getting it from school. And both my parents work for the school district and work in schools. So I was very quick to tell them that and be like, please be careful. I know you're vaccinated, but try not to get in any kids' faces because that's concerning. But then I don't know, there are some times where like I had like 2 cases in one shift and I was like, well, maybe it is over. So it depended at what point in time we're at.
Okay, and so I know, like you just mentioned, your shift would vary based on the amount of calls you had. So at most, or I guess on average rather, how long were your shifts? Were you there at your phone like for how, like hours and hours, or what was that
Oh
like?
no, all my shifts were 4 hours long. I did the first half, like the mornings, Monday through Friday. And so the way it works is there's kind of like this calling and case interface that we used. And so cases are then assigned to you. So when you open up and you log in, you get 2 cases assigned to you immediately. And then every time you close a case, you're supposed to get another one assigned to you. But sometimes it would happen where I would get assigned 2 cases at once in the morning, and I would close both of them, and then I wouldn't get another case assigned to me for hours or at all. And then other times there were days where every time I closed out a case, I would get 2 more, just because there were so many that needed to be like called. So it depends.
Okay, and you were calling people, I know we talked about it in the pre-interview, but just to clarify for this interview, you were contacting people all over Texas or more locally, or?
Yeah, it was all over Texas. I feel like I've probably called every county in Texas at this point.
Okay, and also in our pre-interview, you mentioned that the amount of, you mentioned that you noticed the amount of calls you make to COVID-infected individuals oftentimes depended on what political decisions were made. So can you please share more about this and provide some examples on how you see political decisions influence public health in your line of work?
Yeah, sure. So a big example was when Greg Abbott ended the mask mandate here in Texas. I had been seeing quite a dip in how many cases we've been having for about a week up to that point. I think it was like shifts where I was having like 1 or 2 cases to call for the whole shift. And then the mask mandate was lifted. And then it ramped up again. That's pretty much it. You know, I definitely started getting more and more calls that I needed to make. A lot of people telling me they didn't know where they got it from, and being like, well, I wore a mask and I social distanced and I washed my hands. So how did this happen to me? And me having to explain like it was probably somebody else that wasn't wearing a mask or didn't wash their hands. So that was interesting to watch in like real time. I think that this whole pandemic is the perfect example of how political decisions can mess with public health. Because we knew a solution to this pandemic from the day it started. And it was what every other country did, and what they told us to do is you need to go on lockdown and you need to pay people during lockdown and make sure that they're fed and make sure that they stay home, and that's how we get past this. And that never happened because the US is a business and only cares about money over people's lives, and that is abundantly clear, especially now towards the end of this pandemic. And just the fact that a global pandemic was politicized and made a bipartisan issue at all just goes to show how little the government cares about our public health and how low it will allow it to fall without making any major decisions or any major intervention. Like how many people have died in the US from COVID at this point? Like it's depressing and it's sad and it's disgusting.
Okay, and now that more and more people are becoming vaccinated, are you concerned that there could be talks of UT Health laying off contact tracers or even cutting hours significantly? Or do you feel secure in your job and position?
Oh no, like I got laid off like a week ago, I think. Yeah. So there was discussion of having my team be moved over to working the national database, but they decided not to renew the grant for like the grant that I was working under that I was being paid with. They didn't renew that grant, so we didn't get added to the national database. So yeah. Sucks, but I'm glad less people are sick. So it's a catch-22.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so I'm sorry about that, by the way. But
It's cool. No
so,
worries.
so this next set of questions focuses on your stories and experience as a Mexican American member of the LGBTQ community, and also about your civic activism as a whole. So to start with, in our pre-interview, you mentioned that you are a member of the LGBTQ community. At this time, would you like to share with me more about your LGBTQ identity, or some of the struggles and highlights of being a bisexual woman in the Rio Grande Valley? And if so, I welcome what you choose to share, and if not, we can move on to the next question.
Sure. I guess an interesting one that's pretty recent is yesterday Brownsville was raising the pride flag here at our visitor center, so that like when you drive by you can see it. Very cute. And I went to the event just to go watch, and I was invited to help raise the pride flag. So that was really cool. Never thought I'd see the day come. I was like, this is for you, little gay me who was sad and scared because people are mean. And it was a really great moment. And I do feel a little bit like now it's been soured slightly, just because there was a lot of local media coverage, and the story that the Brownsville Herald ran has some pretty nasty Facebook comments. So that's not fun. It wasn't unexpected though, just because there's definitely a minority of people, at least in Brownsville, that are very homophobic and very anti-LGBT. And it's disappointing and it's sad, but it's not unexpected, I guess. And I think that their voices are just really, really loud. There's not as many as we think there are, just because if you even look at the way that like the Valley as a whole votes, it's always blue here. I think Cameron County, for the 2020 presidential, we had the most votes for Bernie Sanders here. So it's not as like conservative or scary as people try to make it seem, at least here in Brownsville or at least in Cameron County. But there is definitely a small hateful minority that are very loud, and that makes it really difficult. So last year, like our pride flag was stolen after it was raised, and the visitor center was defaced with some slurs. So that was lame. And they're pretty mean on Facebook, but I have hope that it gets better. Like I said, never in a million years did I think I would get to raise the pride flag in my own city. So it's getting better, and it's definitely a lot more positive. And the LGBT community that we have here in the Valley is so cool and so loving. I think just because you don't really get what it's like to be queer here unless you're queer here. And it's definitely not the easiest. So I'm glad that we have such a strong community, and such a powerful community that's always willing to like fight for others or willing to make a difference, because that's how we got the pride flag raised in the visitor center, or why we have an LGBT task force here in Brownsville, is, you know, people really sticking their necks out and trying to make change even when it's not necessarily popular or accepted or conventional.
Okay, thank you for sharing that. So how may I ask, is being a member of the LGBT community influenced your political activism and efforts to support your local community?
It definitely has influenced my politics just as a whole. Just because I'm not about to go like support or vote for somebody who thinks I'm an abomination or, you know, anything like that. I think that now in 2021 and in recent years, a little bit more specifically post marriage equality decision, you know, the LGBT community has definitely become a lot more accepted and a lot more mainstream, but I think that it's also become like liberalized. And not in the term like, you know, liberals and conservatives. Liberals is in like global politics. And it's, you know, it's one of those things where like everybody's a Democrat, but like being a Democrat is basically being a Republican. And so that's kind of the hard thing is like in my own political journey and in my own political activism, I tend to look towards and side with a lot of more radical LGBT thinkers, a lot of more radical LGBT just readings in general. And I feel like we've kind of strayed from that. And it's all about more like, yes, brunch. Oh my God, I love a pride parade. And it's, you know, like Stonewall was a riot. Pride was a riot that was led by Black trans women. And I think that we forget that or we romanticize that now. And that does make me a little bit sad because I feel like the very like fundamentals and the very basics of like my own personal politics come from, you know, queer women of color that, you know, were radical and outspoken in ways that were definitely not accepted by anybody here in the US and were not really accepted even by leftist straight men outside of the US. So it's interesting. It's interesting to see the way people interact with the LGBT community, the way that people within the LGBTQ community interact with each other. And so it does feel sometimes like a lot of us have forgotten our history and like how we got to this place of Target pride and being able to buy a rainbow shirt at like Old Navy. It's not really about that. It's about like liberation for all oppressed people and allowing people to just live their authentic lives without barriers. And that involves class, that involves race, that involves gender. And so I do feel like sometimes it's become a lot more watered down and a lot more, you know, rainbows and getting drunk. And that does make me sad.
Okay. So what, may I ask, are some of the unique circumstances Mexican Americans or Latino LGBTQ community members face culturally or otherwise, in your opinion?
I mean, a big one is religion. The Mexicans love Jesus. We've been new. So that's always a hard one. I feel like I don't know a queer Mexican American person that doesn't have at least a little bit of religious trauma. You know? So that's definitely a barrier that I don't think everybody has to face when it comes to the LGBTQ community. I think a lot of issues, especially with a lot of the older communities as well, is like believing it, which is interesting. Like I feel like a lot of other queer friends I had growing up that had issues with their parents or had issues with coming out, it was a lot of like their parents didn't believe them or like, oh, it's just a phase, you'll grow out of it kind of things. And I feel like in our community, I think there's now acknowledgement that like queer people exist, but I think we now need to move towards like this is a viable like life that people can live forever. It doesn't have to just be a phase. We don't have to pretend, you know, that your kid isn't gay. You don't have to tell your kid they're going to hell anymore. That's like, come on, it's 2021.
Okay, and just as well, do you feel that being Mexican American impacts your decision to be politically and civically involved?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, just historically, in general, the way the US treats anybody that's not like, you know, a WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, I think that definitely changes people's political opinions. I think for me specifically, what's really shaped that, like my political opinions and being part of the Mexican American community, has just been like the militarization of like our home, because we live near the border, and this weird like dichotomy of us and them, but we're both us and them. And so it makes it like it makes it a weird space to be in, and it makes it, I think for some people, I think it definitely makes it difficult to like, choose a side, so to say. But for me, it just makes me really angry. And I think that's how I kind of like align politically. Just because like I'm the kind of person, like I don't believe in borders. I don't believe in US hegemony. I don't believe in US imperialism. I don't even really believe in Mexico even as a settler state, like I have my own issues with Mexican politics separately, but just being categorized, as other or as different from just your run-of-the-mill white person, I think just affects anybody's political opinions. And the Valley is just such a perfect example of how like US capitalism just systemically drains the hell out of regions and people and labor and money. And it's silly to look at class without looking at like race or ethnicity. It just doesn't make sense. So, intersectionally, it's an identity that's definitely helped shape my politics.
Okay. And how and when did you, either as a professional or as a volunteer, begin to support your community? Like, have you always assisted mutual aids or grassroots organizations?
I don't know if I have like a date, right? Or like specifically mutual aid or grassroots organizations, but I do always say that like I feel sometimes like I've always kind of organized or like participated in organizing, starting from when I was like a little kid. My parents were real big into like beach cleanups and stuff like that. So we always did stuff like that. When I got a little older, I joined Girl Scouts because I'm a big nerd. But a lot of what our troop did was community service. And so I feel like I gained like a real love for community service through my Girl Scout troop. And then from there, going to high school. And in high school, you have to have community service hours to graduate and stuff like that. I got really involved with my National Honor Society chapter. And from there is where I started volunteering with Friendship of Women and Planned Parenthood Texas Votes. And I don't love the nonprofit industrial complex so much these days. But I do have to give like PPTV props for showing me that like this is a viable like career choice, and like you can really, it doesn't have to just be an extracurricular or a hobby. Like this can be a career, and this can be like a life that you live. And I don't know, I've kind of run with it since then. It's what I like to do.
Okay. And did the stay-at-home order affect your means to continuously organize and support your community? And if it did, how did you continue your work, or did you maybe put a pause on it for some time?
It definitely did. I think we all kind of had to scramble and regroup and understand how we could or become creative on like how we can do this without seeing each other in person. So all of us had to get really good at digital organizing really fast. Luckily for me, I feel like that's an area of organizing that I just always kind of do well in. So I feel like I had it a little bit easier, but like, for example, we usually do a bowl-a-thon for Frontera Fund, which is a fundraiser. And Frontera Fund is the Valley's only abortion fund. And usually we have like a big event or like a party, and everybody pays to get in, and like, we can make a decent amount of money, but we can do that, because of the pandemic. So we started Bake-a-thon, which was a contactless bake sale. And we ended up raising like pretty good amount of money. And we did it again this year, and it was still really successful. And I don't think that that's an idea that would have come forth without the pandemic, just because like we've done bake sales before, but they're always like at an event, you know, tabling, things like that. But this is like, it was run all through social media. And then it just kind of taught us that we really can do fundraising and we really can do like distribution and things like that without seeing each other. It's stressful and you have to be in like 50 group chats to coordinate. But if you're willing to put in the work and the screen time, it's definitely doable.
Okay, and on that note, have you witnessed local activism change or possibly progress or decline since many aspects of it has shifted to online in the past year?
I've definitely seen a change just in that like there are a lot of new people. I think a mixture of like the pandemic and the Black Lives Matter movement last summer really pushed people to become political for the first times ever. So it's just interesting, like there's a lot more people who want to get involved, a lot more people who like kind of have joined in like the circle of activism or so. And that's been pretty cool. And then it's weird because like you feel sometimes like you know these people, but then I'm like, well, I've never actually met them. We've just been coordinating through like Twitter and Signal group chats or whatever. So it feels like you know them. So that's been cool. And just connecting with a lot of different organizers and new like or people that I didn't think I would be organizing with has been pretty cool too. And then it also helps if you want to organize with people that aren't in your region or your city. So like I was the campus organizer for Deeds Not Words, but they're located in Austin and every other organizer is at a different Texas University campus. And so it was weird because like we talk about all of our plans or whatever through like Zoom. And I never actually like met my boss in person. I only know what she looks like on a computer screen kind of thing. So that's weird. But I think we've all managed to make it work. And I don't think that there's really been a lull in organizing. Like, I don't think people have dropped the ball at all. And I think there definitely was room for people to drop the ball because like, it's been a traumatic ass year. I don't know, organizers are built different though. Some people can just energize or bunny it and go. It's wild to me.
Okay, and also during your pre-interview, you explained to me that you have participated in political rallies in the past, and more recently, the Black Lives Matter protest in Brownsville in July of 2020. So can you describe to me what precautions you took while attending this rally during the peak of the pandemic in the RGV? So were you nervous to attend this event because of COVID-19?
Yes, I was super nervous. I felt though that like just within my own morals and values, it was a risk that needed to be taken. And so main precautions I took, I mean, I wore a mask. I think I wore sunglasses as well. I tried to stay away as like further away from people as I could. Luckily, everybody was pretty much wearing a mask. I don't think I saw a single person without one. And people were passing out hand sanitizer and water, which was great. So that did definitely make me feel a little bit better. Afterwards, I just kind of tried to like social distance like quite a lot just because I wanted to make sure I wasn't sick. However, at that point, yeah, that was late July. At that point, my mom had started having to go into her campus for work. She's a librarian. And so she had been kind of seeing people as well. And so she kind of just felt like, well, it's one of us, or there's the weakest link. And we kind of just made sure not to hang out with like I don't think I saw my grandparents that week, or for like, I think 2 weeks after that, I didn't go because I wanted to make sure like I was 100% not sick. And then when I visited them after that, I made sure to wear a mask, things like that. But I'm like pretty surprised because I remember when I saw how many people were there, I was like, oh my God, this is going to be a super spreader event. But because everybody was so good about wearing masks and like not being all up next to each other. I don't really think anybody got sick from those events, or at least from the Brownsville one. So that also made me feel good.
Okay, and so now I would like to ask you about your participation in local mutual aid drives that you helped organize in the past year. So firstly, before we get started, can you tell me why you think mutual aid is important? And according to your knowledge and experiences, how can you apply this importance to Brownsville specifically?
Sure. So mutual aid is super important because it's some of the most quickly and most effective organizing that can be done. Because it's just fundraising money and distributing money, the same money, you know, there's no, or usually there shouldn't be any, the true idea of mutual aid, some people have messed with that and become like nonprofits now. But the true idea of mutual aid is like none of this money is claimed, it's not taxed or anything. None of this money is coming from like a foundation or anything. It's just a bunch, it's supposed to be like a group of radicals that are just holding on to this cash and just redistributing it. Like in the most basic sense of the term. And I think anybody who's ever been broke ever could tell you a million times over, like how helpful it would be if somebody just straight up gave you cash. And I like that it has a lot of autonomy with it. And I think that's really important. So like specifically for us, we redistributed funds to the unsheltered community. And so what a lot of people do is say stuff like, you shouldn't give them money. They're just going to use it to go buy drugs. They're just going to use it to go buy alcohol. You should give them food or clothes instead. And that way it's actually something useful. But like, that's so cop-like. I feel like listen, I have a house, I have food in my fridge, I have money in my bank account and a warm bed, and I still, you know, I'm gonna drink because life's freaking hard. And that's with, you know, really all of the first world luxuries to make my life as easy as possible. So how am I gonna go up to anybody ever and be like, I can't believe you're spending your $1 on a tall boy? Like, what the hell is that? That's not helpful. It's not helpful to anybody. And you know, I think a lot of other people try to go at it, then we're gonna go like the electoral route and let's go make sure that we're voting in people that are gonna take care of our homeless populations, and we're gonna vote for people that are gonna, you know, make change and open up a homeless shelter and stuff like that. But there's a lot of caveats with that, and that's a long con. That takes a lot of time. People are starving right now. People are sleeping on streets right now. People need money like right now. And so with mutual aid, you can do that. And if somebody wants to use the $80 that I gave them a few weeks ago on drugs or alcohol and not use it for anything else, that's totally fine. I'm just glad I could make somebody's life a little bit easier. And I think that autonomy that comes with mutual aid, and that idea that like there's no strings attached to this money, you don't have to show me anything you bought with it, this is your money, really makes a big difference. And it really makes a big difference in what you're doing to somebody long term and how they feel about themselves, or just the approach that you have and the way that, like, you know, they can interact with their community, therefore, you know. Like, I'm glad I got to know these people's names. I'm glad I remember where they like live, you know, because like they're my neighbors. Why shouldn't I know where all my other neighbors live? I don't even think I know my neighbors' names, but that's just because I'm unfriendly. But it's just so important. And I think we like to delude ourselves sometimes into thinking that in this like late stage capitalist society, that there's really anything that's more helpful than just giving somebody who's really struggling the money they need. And so I'm glad it's become a lot more mainstream, and I'm glad a lot of people are really learning about mutual aid and starting to donate to mutual aid versus like an organization.
Okay, so this year, You helped organize 2 material and fund drives this year for unsheltered communities in Brownsville and around the RGV. So can you please describe what those 2 drives were in response to and who helped you create them?
Sure. So the first one was in response to the winter storm, or snowpocalypse, that happens here in Texas. And it was brought forth by a friend in a group chat with a few other friends, that are, all of us are in this kind of like collective of more radical non-men, basically. So like women, non-binary people as well, trans people. We're all in this collective. There's, I think, like 15 of us now. And so we just brought it forth there just because we were like, well, I mean, all these people are always saying they're ready to help. And we're like, listen, we know that the winter storm is in like 4 days, but I think we can throw this together. And so, yeah, we just kind of coordinated across the valley because the friend that brought it up is from West Laco, but we decided we wanted to do, I think we had 4 like drop off points or whatever for donations. And it started off as just like, oh, it's a blanket drive. We're just gonna give out blankets, to then people asking if they could donate cash, if they could donate food, if they could donate water. And so then it ended up being like blankets and coats and snack bags and also cash drive, which was pretty cool. So that was what the first one was for. And then the second one was kind of the opposite. It was for the heat and all the rain, because it's been pretty rainy recently. And like not just a little bit, like it flooded here and stuff like that too. So we kind of wanted to combat that. So similar reasoning, but this time it was just in Brownsville, because that collective, a lot of people are students, and it was kind of like end of the semester. So it was a little bit too difficult for everybody to participate. But we did it here in Brownsville, so it's fine.
Okay, and how did you become aware of the needs of unsheltered communities in Brownsville, just based off of observation, or did you have any personal connections within those communities?
Yeah, observation, and just other nonprofits I've spoken to or volunteered at. I volunteered at Good Neighbor Settlement House before, which is like one of our biggest homeless shelters. And they shelter like the asylum seekers when they come from Mexico. But the problem is, and like what they explained to me, is that a lot of the homeless shelters here are faith-based. So like we have Good Neighbor Settlement House, we have Ozanam Center, I believe like Upper Valley, there's like Loaves and Fishes and stuff like that. So they're all faith-based, and the problem with faith-based shelters is they usually don't want people who like aren't sober. And a lot of times one of the caveats is like that you have to work or you have to eventually work. So disabled people and addicts and alcoholics are the ones who get left like straight up on the street. And so I knew that already. And then just observation, I mean, I think I recognize almost every single unsheltered person around town just because like they're there while I'm driving every day, And a lot of them have been here for like years also. So like I've been seeing the same people since like I was a kid and stuff. So that's always broke my heart a little bit. Like it's been so long and nobody's ever helped you, like ever.
So in that way, at least like with the faith-based nonprofits, right? Nonprofits can be kind of limiting in terms of who they help.
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, I get why. They're usually the arguments are just kind of like, well, like we don't have the resources to help an addict. We don't have the resources to help somebody who's mentally ill, or other people who stay here, it makes them uncomfortable if they have kids. So like I get it. I just think that shouldn't mean like, well, this is where we stop then. I think it means then we need to come up with a solution.
I see that. So, so how did you popularize these drives? Did you depend solely on social media, or did you also advertise them in person? And if so, how did you do that?
It was 100% social media, both times. And then I guess like word of mouth to like family members. Like I told my parents and they gave me like 20 bucks. But yeah, everything was through social media.
Okay, and how were funds raised, meaning through what platforms? So were donations primarily online, or did you receive cash donations as well?
I received, I think, 2 cash donations, which were both from family members who just had cash on them. Everything else I received through Cash App, which is what we used the first time. I didn't make that decision. The first time, the person who was handling the money was like, I'm just gonna use Cash App. And I asked her the second time, I was like, would you recommend it? And she was like, yeah, just for like direct donations like that. Because then also nobody can contest the fact that like it's a gift. You know what I mean? So like there's really no tracing it. Especially because I was like, it's near my birthday. I could just be like, it's all birthday gifts. Like, what are you talking about, Cash App? Because sometimes like Venmo or Cash App and things like that, they'll get a little bit weird if you start having too many transactions. But Cash App is the least annoying about it. So it worked.
Okay, and for material donations such as blankets or coats or things like that, how did you guys collect those? Did you have like a drop-off station, or would you pick them up from donors, or
Yeah, we had 4 like drop-off locations, which were different people's houses. And so then from there, distributors could go pick up the donations or like after they were divvied up evenly.
Okay, and so what determined the material and financial distributions? So did each recipient receive a base amount of funds or materials, or did it vary? How did that work?
Yes. So the first time we gave everybody, I think, a sleeping bag, a snack bag, a 20, and then we had a few blankets as well. So some people already had blankets or like a sleeping bag. So we did see a couple people who only had like 1 blanket. And so that like we gave that person another blanket. And we kind of made those decisions that way. And yeah, the money was just in 20s and there was the same amount with how many snack bags and sleeping bags there were. And I think that decision was made by the person who was the donation spot here in Brownsville. She went around town and kind of just counted how many people she saw, and I think added like 5 to that. And I was like, that's how many we'll do, just in case. And we distributed everything, and I'm pretty sure mostly everybody got one that we saw at least. The second time around, I made the decision that since we broke 1,000, I wanted to use about 250 for supplies, just because we really didn't get any supply donations this time. And then I wanted to use the rest in cash so that they could have a pretty decent chunk of cash instead of just like a 20. And so the way that worked is I just did it in tens. So I bought 10 of everything and made kind of like a supply bag with like an umbrella, a hat, sunscreen, big refillable water bottle, some Powerade in case you got dehydrated, things like that. Bug spray. And then I divided the rest of the money up into 10. And so everybody got $80. And we just distributed until we ran out. Okay, and then, yeah, I think we pretty much gave one to everybody. No, go ahead, sorry.
For the distribution, for both drives, since we are still like in a pandemic and those drives were during the pandemic, for distribution, would people who were comfortable distribute, or was it just everybody going out and distributing to those who needed?
Yeah, it was just who volunteered. Everything was on like a volunteer basis. So like here in Brownsville, the girl who did the donation spot went and distributed with a friend. And then me and my boyfriend distributed as well, just because we both volunteered.
Okay. And on that note about this being a pandemic era, were COVID related items also donated to these communities, such as masks or Germ-X, things like that?
Yes, we, in both bags, I think we included masks and like wipes of some sort. I also included ibuprofen this last time because it can be used for like fevers, but also for like any kind of aches and pains. So I thought that would be helpful.
Okay, so what was it like distributing aid to people in need during the pandemic? So was it challenging, or did you and the other volunteers find creative ways to do so in a COVID safe manner? And also, were you nervous about doing this?
I mean, there's always a little bit of, nervousness with COVID now and just seeing anybody, but it wasn't like large groups of people. We all wore masks all of the time. I'm fully vaccinated. I think most of us were fully vaccinated even by the first rapid resource drive. So that did make me feel a little bit better. And when you distribute, you only see these people for like a minute, maybe. Not everybody wants to talk to you. Not everybody's awake either. So like there were a couple drop-offs where I just left the bag next to somebody who was asleep. So that makes it a little bit easier. It's usually outside as well. So it wasn't too stressful. And we just tried to make sure that we were keeping it to like small amounts of people, you don't need 5 people to distribute kind of thing.
Okay, and do you feel that governmental support may be inaccessible to some individuals or communities, thus creating the need for nonprofits or mutual aid organizations? And if so, can you explain how this may be?
Yeah, I mean, nonprofits exist because they're needed. I think that's, they're seeing a need, they're trying to fill a need. However, I think a lot of nonprofits have also figured out that in order for them to continue and for everybody to keep getting paid, there has to be a need. And that's why, no major radical change is ever really made. Because they're businesses, and I think it's a little bit naive to think otherwise. And maybe that's just because I'm like old and cynical and have been screwed over by nonprofits a few times now. So like it happens to some of us. We're all kind of like over it eventually. But there is a need, and there is work that needs to be done. And that doesn't mean that organizing is not 100% necessary. I think we just kind of need to move past the idea that all major organizing and all big wins are going to be done by nonprofits, and that like it's got to like kind of permeate your life a little bit, because at least for me, what I'm organizing towards and what my end goal in sight is not like a political party. It's not like a material condition for me specifically. It's more of like a real cultural shift in values and like what we take seriously and how we interact with each other and take care of each other. And I don't necessarily think that can be completely won over by nonprofits or just mutual aid, but I think that we need to help people now because we're all existing under this like messed up system, and just help people as much as we can until these big changes can be made.
Okay. So due to your experience in distributing assistance to houseless communities in Brownsville, as well as establishing relationships with some of those individuals in need, like we talked about in our pre-interview, can you possibly assess how COVID-19 has impacted these communities specifically?
For sure. I think that COVID-19 has impacted just every community and just the way that we interact with each other, the way that we talk to each other. are just our feelings of safety in general. And I don't think that's exclusive to any one group. And I think it's levels of privilege as well. How well you can take, how seriously you can take the pandemic. Not everybody gets to work from home. Not everybody can social distance depending on like what jobs you do, things like that, how much you have to work. So I think it's just changed everything and everyone.
Okay, and last question for this section. What do you think has been the biggest challenge of operating and promoting material and financial donation drives during the COVID-19 pandemic? And on the same note, what has been the most fulfilling aspect of it all?
I think the hardest part for me is asking people for money right now. Makes me feel a little weird just because I feel like everybody's kind of struggling. Because it's a hard time just financially. So that always is really difficult. It's also hard to know the line. Like, am I being annoying by posting this so much, or am I being effective? So I always tried to follow like the high traffic schedule or whatever. So I think it's like the majority of people are on social media from like 8 to 9 or something like that, and then like 7 to 9 at night. They're the peak time. So I would try to like post during that time, which I think worked. But yeah, that was difficult. I think the most fulfilling part of it was how effective it was, because like this last one, I was very aware that it was just me pretty quickly. And I was like, okay, I'm gonna do this. I was expecting to raise maybe like $300, $400, nothing crazy, but I was like, I'll take what I can get, we'll make it work. And then I broke $1,000 and I was like, oh my God, this is way more money than I thought I was gonna have. It was way more successful than I thought it was going to be. And that made me feel good that like so many people donated and like wanted to help, and like cared, just because it's a tough time. It's a tough time to even care for like a lot of people. And I totally get that, because like it's exhausting.
Yeah, for sure. I feel like a lot of people at this point are really burnt out. Like there's so much that happens.
Exactly. Like the apathy, like I can't blame people for that, because we're all just trying to survive. So I was glad that I don't know, that people made the effort. That was cool.
Yeah, for sure. So now to close, I'll ask you some final questions. So are you satisfied with the local response to COVID-19 in Brownsville and Cameron County?
I think it's better than most. However, I don't think it was perfect. I don't know if that's necessarily the county or the city's fault, just because like a lot of what they were explaining to us was like that they had to follow what the state said or what the federal government said. And I think that's really where mistakes were made is at the state and federal level. I think local governments, I think we expected them to have a lot more power in this situation than they did. So like, I do think there were things they could have done that would have been better. For example, like a moratorium on rent, just countywide, would have been great. I think it was FAR, I want to say, or Mission, had something with their like utilities where like they didn't have to pay them for a month, which was pretty cool. So I think things that were a little bit more helpful like that on the local level should have happened. But like at the very least, they like made everybody wear masks for a while, and like you can't even say that about all of Texas. So I'll give them that.
Okay, and you mentioned this a little bit right now. Are you satisfied with the state response to COVID-19 led by Texas and Governor Greg Abbott?
No. I mean, look, I have had beef with Greg Abbott since day one. He's not my fave at all. However, I think that his response to the pandemic has been like borderline evil at this point. And I think it's disgusting what he'll do to appease his like misinformed fan base. And I think just as a whole, it's disgusting what a lot of these like really conservative politicians are really willing to like say and do when it just comes to like straight up misinformation, you know? Like, how is a politician allowed to not believe that the pandemic doesn't exist? You know what I mean? Like, that's crazy to me. That's crazy to me. But yeah, I just feel like his responses, especially recently, have gotten like very like targeted. So like, you know, having Texas opt out of the extra unemployment benefits was pretty messed up because he's just trying to force people to work stupid wages. I like what was the other one he did where like schools are not allowed to enforce mask wearing now. And my mom was explaining it to me. She said like they had to take down all of the signs that asked people to wear masks. You're not even allowed to tell a kid to fix their mask anymore. And I think they're gonna like audit every single school and like make sure. And if you have anything that says you have to wear a mask, they're like fining people. And I'm like, that's some super villain nonsense. Like you're messing with school children. Like you want school children and teachers to get sick. Like, are you kidding me? Is it worth it? So I'm not satisfied.
Okay, and you also mentioned this a little bit as well in the question before that. Were you satisfied with the 2020 national response to COVID-19 led by former President Donald Trump?
No, I wasn't satisfied with that either. I don't think anybody was on either side, quite frankly. But no, it was the ridiculous response. And just a really sick example of what politicians will do for campaigns and why electoral politics really like suck the soul out of people and sometimes don't really make anything better at all. And it was a disappointing response. And yeah, I mean, it's just another example of the US just not caring and killing thousands of people. So nothing new, but disappointing nonetheless.
Okay, and are you satisfied with the current national response to COVID-19 led by President Joe Biden and his administration?
Also, no, I don't really feel like they really did anything. Like, yeah, they got vaccinated like on TV, wow. But, you know, I don't like to look at things in terms of just the US. Like, we're a whole planet. And I think like all this issue with like patents is really dumb. You know, the withholding the vaccine, the fact that like no one else in the world is getting vaccinated on this level because of the US is pretty sick. And then just all of the like, you know, false promises that would have taken financial strain off of people. Like, you know, promising to cancel student debt. It doesn't seem like it's related to the pandemic, but I'm sure canceling student debt would really take a financial strain off quite a few people and they would have more money to, you know, survive off of. Raising minimum wage, you know, that's been a promise for who knows how long that has never happened. And that would make a huge difference and, you know, could make a huge difference overnight, but, you know, nobody has the gall. So I just feel like it's been lackluster at best. I mean, it's cool, I guess, that they like acknowledge that COVID is dangerous and like wear masks and stuff, but bare minimum. So do I. You don't see me asking for a medal for it.
Okay, and if you had the power to respond to COVID-19 with policies, laws, or workplace decisions, what would you do differently, if anything?
Sure. I mean, first thing would be to implement like a universal basic income and lock everybody down for as long as it would take. Would have been first response. Making sure everybody got food delivered so they don't even have to go out for food. You know, I think the problem here is everybody was really concerned about the shutdown of the economy, and I don't think the economy should be dependent on people slaving away 365 days a year. Like like we can take a break for a global pandemic. Like, are you kidding me? So that would be my first, I guess, response. But I mean, it all just goes back down into like the fabric of what the US is and who we are, you know? Like this pandemic response could be so different if we had universal health care. So I guess that's what I would do. I would also sign universal health care all in the same day. A bunch of Republicans would like choke and die. So yeah, I would want to include universal health care. I would raise minimum wage. This whole idea of an essential worker, no. Like everybody needs to stay inside. McDonald's does not need to be open right now. You can go home, you know, kind of thing. I don't believe utilities should be charged, so I would put a moratorium on rent, put a moratorium on utilities. Personally, I believe internet is a utility, so I would want to make sure everybody had internet. And like blanket Wi-Fi's are very doable, and quite a lot of cities have them. So maybe setting up some kind of blanket Wi-Fi so everybody can work and stuff if they wanted to from home. But I mean, that's just the beginning. There's so many better examples around the world of how to handle a pandemic, and the US is not one of them.
Okay, and last question for today. Are there any other stories or experiences you would like to share with me that I have not asked about?
I don't think so. Anything you need like clarification on or wanted me to elaborate on, or we're good?
I think we're okay on my part.
Cool, I'm good too. I forgot to tell you, I like your pink hair.
Thank you.
I kept like remembering at weird times.
Thank you. But okay, well, I guess that's it for our interview. Thank you so much for participating again and like contributing to the special collections. This was a really great interview.